Hello everyone, today we are talking about Phandelver and Below, the Shattered Obelisk, and the art, the cover, and the design that you find on all of the pages.
Amanda and I are both huge fans of just the horror genre in general, and we love a pulpy situation. And so we thought, just based on sort of the big bad and where that big bad was coming from, that a really toxic green, sort of like that green sludge that you imagine with like nuclear waste, and that you see, and I think of Ninja Turtles a lot in that regard. But that green, that something is wrong, makes its way throughout the entire book. It's in the alt cover. It's in the art as you go progressively through the book. It gets more prominent, and it's in the design that Trish worked up as well.
As things in Phandelver seem to keep getting a little more chaotic and a little more odd, you see that progression as well throughout the layout as the book goes.
I like to think about it like it gets grosser as you go on. Trish did an amazing job where you get that sort of that idyllic town set, like the initial bit, you get a little hint of it in there.
It was so sweet.
And then once you get past sort of that remastered part, then it gets heavier. It gets moodier, it gets darker, it gets a little bit more oppressive as far as the graphic design goes. And then Trish continued to layer in not only that meaning, but that grit and that heaviness. And by the time you get to the fudged up stuff at the end, it's like, oh yeah, I feel the stress of this moment in the design as well as in the art.
I know it works together, but it's almost like I would do it and Bree would look at it and go, no, add more, keep adding. I was like, okay, just keep throwing things on. So
part of the fun of this project is oftentimes we do sort of like, I don't want to say standard adventure kinds of things, but it's your high fantasy feelings. And this is darker than that. I can't even talk about all of the things because they're going to be, others to discover along the way, but it gets real gross. And I love that.
Just keep the odd cow in your brain.
I was surprised at how charmed by her most people are. And you can, of course, help aid her in getting rid of that corruption. But I kind of just would want to keep that tentacle monster cow around.
Yeah.
Picks its own grass from far away. There's also a cloaker mutate, which is one of the more effed up monsters, which I was very excited to commission. I was like, okay, bear with me. It's a cloaker with a dwarven skeleton smashed onto its face, and it just flies around with that skeleton. Creepy. That's just that's what it wants to wear today. The oculorb, I love the way that the artist, I believe it was Brian Valenzuela, did a beautiful piece, the oculorb, and it gets me because the monster is amazing. It's this gross amalgamation of a bajillion eyeballs, but the way that it was rendered has this sort of soft, ethereal, multi-emotional, like each eye has its own emotion and shape, and I love it. It's charmed. We have to balance this fine line between that horror and grossness and not alienating people for whom that might be a little bit too much. And so by the time we get to the end of the book, it's gnarly.
I think even people though, I'm not a huge horror genre fan, but there are images in there. So like the ash zombies, that piece of art, that thing, it looks like it is just going to come out of the art at you. It is one of my favorites. I constantly go back to it when I would be laying stuff out. I'm like, I love that piece.
I like it.
It's very cool.
I like to shove in Easter eggs wherever possible. So there are some of those early shots that you see just a little something that's off that hints to that corruption that comes later. A large part of what I get to do is to make sure that cadence feels right, that cinematic timing is appropriate for what's happening in the book as well. We have to manage that cadence in the design and how we're treating the art too.
For me, it starts right at the beginning. So it's talking to the art director, it's talking to the game designer, and figuring out what is the feeling that they want to evoke throughout the book. And if it has a progression, just knowing where is it going to go. And then you get these pieces of art, and that speaks to it too. So depending on what the art looks like, I might choose to crop it a certain way just because I like this area of the art and I really want it to stand out. So those types of things. I definitely I don't know about you, but I like to go piece to piece.
Yeah.
And so its treatment is just depends. I don't want it to be, oh, this is going to go here all the time.
Mm-hmm.
This is going to go here all the time. And it's always going to fall like this. I like to have it be a little bit more organic and be able to play with things a little more.
I know that we have like a very sort of standard look, right? You have a stat block in a certain way, and you have our fonts and all of that sort of thing. But each book is a very custom piece. As Trish was saying, she's very considerate about where is this art existing on this piece of page? How do I support it with the elements that I've made? But also, how are we supporting the gameplay elements that we need for people to reference? And are we making sure that the text is readable? And are we adding enough sort of flavor to this moment? And Trish gets to do that sort of page by page. She like develops a custom sort of page by page. You sort of experience it mostly in 2D, but when you get it in your hands, it's a different thing. Largely, you've had enough time to forget all of the things that were hard about it, and you have this real thing in your hand now, and you're like, yes, oh, it was worth it. So the traditional cover that Antonio did is meant to be a little bit more lighthearted, to speak more towards the front end of the book in general. So you're in this idyllic town and you have these goblins who are causing a lot of like chaos in order to obtain some things that their bosses are sending them out. But they're to me the comedic relief. So you have this sort of beautiful sunset moment, and you have goblins like doing their gobbo best to get away with the thing that they've stolen. And there's another goblin that's like scratching some graffiti, as they do throughout multiple pieces in within the book. But he's just like thinking really hard about that graffiti. And so you get this sort of like silly moment. And then you have the alt cover by DZO, and it's just chaos. It's chaos that's indicative of, and for me, it's like a wild ride of monsters. There's just a lot of crazy stuff happening at all times. And for me too, it's also about that mystery. You could look at this thing, I've looked at it a bajillion times, and I still find new things in it. I'm like, oh, that's really clever. Wow, that's a lot of teeth. There's a lot of eyeballs in here. That's really wet looking. Huh. And there's all of some of the new monsters that are in there, some of the big bads that you're going to fight. They're all in that cover. And I just want to like print it out black and white and color it, which is actually a good note. So we did get that piece of art in that it was just black and white, and
it's
Trish,
so cool.
Trish did some amazing work to bring that through line color to it, and just
green.
We made it so wet and gross and green.
It was like painting.
So
it was just, I sat there and just painted it in like, oh, I want it to be here and I want this to be here. But that art, when that came in, originally I wasn't supposed to be the one working on it, and I was like, oh, that's such an amazing piece. I'm like, oh, I get to work on it. Okay, cool.
You did such a good
But
job.
yeah, I hope the illustrator likes the way that the end result came. I think it's my favorite alt cover that I've worked on so far.
You pushed and pulled
Like,
so many buttons to make it.
It was fun, and I can't wait for it to come back and, like you said, to get it
in your hands, because it's so much different than that. Like, this is a plate separation, and this is where the gloss will go. But then you get the gloss in real life, and you're just like, ugh, it's so gross. I love it.